Well, hi students, here we are. It's Friday and the day off of school, and I just cannot sacrifice another day in order to keep on pace and on track with where we need to be. So I'll make this as quick as I can, as short and sweet as I can. Be prepared for a quiz on Monday. It will not contain this information, but it will contain the information up to Thursday and through Thursday. So I want to continue our discussion of the motivation for eating, and we talk about some eating disorders. The first two that we're going to talk about fall into the category of eating disorders of not eating, of limiting eating, and then we're going to look at obesity as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is how eating disorders are very much a cultural phenomenon. We see that eating disorders such as anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa happen really only in progressive countries. You really don't see these types of eating disorders in countries that have food insecurities or don't have really a lot of food widely available. And so we very much realize that this is a social issue and not so much of an individual issue, but it very much focuses on the individual. And it's because there's trying to kind of achieve some sort of control in their lives. What we know about eating disorders such as anorexia and bulimia is people who suffer with these, they feel like it's the one thing that they can control. Oftentimes, especially anorexics, have a very high sense of perfection. Like they have a lot of need for perfectionism in their life, but because of other things that they feel like they can't control, their life is maybe overwhelming, they have a lot of stress, family dynamics or relationships or whatever, this is the one thing that they can control. And in anorexics, it means they severely limit the amount of food that they take in. Typically, demographically, it is white, teenage, female women. Usually from about the age of 15 to 25 is the demographics that they usually fall in. Oftentimes female, typically white females. When I have the word 85 or the number 85% there, anorexics are classified as being 85% of their natural body weight. So if you have a smaller frame and you are only 85% of what you should be for a weight amount, that's a really small number, and it's a very dangerous place to be. Anorexics, for instance, you can see this figure on the left. The woman on the left, Isabel. The woman on the left is looking in the mirror, and we see the figure of what she really looks like on the left, but to her, she sees in the mirror that larger image. It's not reality, it is her perception, and that's why there's this constant feeling of like not being good enough and a continual restriction of calories. And it's very, very difficult very hard on your organs, your entire really body system. But remember, it's not just between the stomach and it's between the brain and the body, the brain and the stomach as well. So kind of on the opposite side, but very much in the same understanding, is a disease known as bulimia nervosa, another eating disorder where people will binge and purge. It's a cycle of binging, like eating a whole bunch of food at once, oftentimes highly caloric, not necessarily, but eating very quickly and a lot of food. Remember, we talked about in the hypothalamus, your brain has to basically signal to your body. And so then they will purge the food. It tends to be through throwing up, but it can also be through laxatives. The difficult thing with bulimia nervosa, which is actually a higher prevalence than anorexia, the difficult thing with bulimia is that it's hard to spot, because most people who suffer with bulimia are quite close to their natural body weight, their natural set point, and so you don't exactly know if people are suffering with bulimia. It tends to be in women. Again, it's a very cultural phenomenon that happens. The ones who actually most spot bulimia are probably dentists. We see that people who have bulimia, their teeth begin to rot because there's so much acid coming back up really from their stomach that it rots their teeth. They can also probably see scratches on their throat from the purge cycle. What's really difficult is that those who suffer with bulimia get to a point where it's almost an automatic reflex where you can't keep food down, and they almost like throw it up automatically. Like they eat and they're so used to purging that they can't just keep the food down at all. And it's a very, again, a very kind of devastating disease on the body. It starts to wreak havoc on many parts of your body over time. But it's hard to identify, and so if women or anybody really doesn't get help or treatment, it can go on and it can linger on for years. So then really on the opposite spectrum, but still an eating disorder, is obesity. And this is when people fall into the category of being obese is considered to have a BMI over 30. One thing I will mention is that most men and women are actually right about the same for being obese in America. There are more men who are overweight than women, but the obesity rates are actually pretty close to the same, and that's again a BMI of over 30. Now that's measured with height and weight, and we know that those are rather limiting factors, but when we talk about categorizing eating disorders, you have to come up with like a number somehow, right? Just the way we do with anorexia. So while BMI does sometimes give you an inaccurate picture of what somebody's overall health is, it's a place to start and understand. There's a lot of factors that go into obesity, though. Set point of metabolism. You know, we talked about that the other day. That your body has a natural set point, a natural metabolism, and fighting against that is kind of like fighting against genetics. It's very hard to do. So genetic factors are a really big one. However, food and activity is just as large, especially in American society. We have a society that is geared toward being efficient, and that means eating food that is processed and fast. But we also are very much geared to a sedentary lifestyle. A lot of people work at jobs where they sit, like they don't have to move. Some states are worse than others in kind of their movement and their exercise, how much people get out. You know, on a day like this where we're in a blizzard, I can guarantee you I'm not going to go out for a walk today. So some of those things can also contribute to obesity rates. And if you look at that graph there in 2020, the United States led the world in the proportion of people who are overweight. A lot of, Australia really, boy, from 1990 until 2020, Australia really took large gains up, and that's not really good for the overall health of the world. It is a big factor that influences a lot of parts of people's lives, not just in individuals, but things like family life, work life, things like that. So let's talk a little bit about like that social influence for eating. Here, I'll move this down a little bit. Do you remember watching Super Size Me? It's like one of those movies I cannot get out of my head. I won't forget it. That was a really kind of striking documentary. And what we do know is since then, which would have been probably in about the early 2000s, we're being more mindful of our unit bias. But we here in America, we love a good value. Like we love a deal. And so places like all you can eat buffets where you feel like you're getting the most bang for your buck is really a difficult understanding of what a normal portion size should be. What we see is like portions are huge these days. But we also know that a lot of people have this kind of sense that you have to eat everything on your plate. Like you have to finish all your food. Don't let things go to waste. And so people are like, oh, I got this huge plate of food, but I also have to eat it all because that's just like my mindset or something that's been kind of passed on to me from previous generations. And so we eat really way too much. Another problem is here in America, we have such a variety of food. I mean, literally, like you want You want pizza, you get pizza. You want tacos, you get tacos. You want sushi, you get sushi. You want barbecue, you get barbecue. Like, we have such an amazing amount of different food varieties and good food varieties that it's like, oh, I'll have a little bit of this and I'll try a little bit of that. And it also kind of contributes to that overall caloric intake that often is really easy to overlook. This is a hard statistic to tell you. This is really interesting. Each year, the normal, typical American consumes about 1 ton of food, about 2,000 pounds of food. If we eat 20 tons of food over the next 40 years, which is a very, very conservative amount, and we increase our daily intake by only like 0.1 ounce, and we don't do anything extra to like work that off, we will gain 24 pounds over the next 40 years. So think of yourself right now. I know it's hard for you to imagine yourself as a 56, 57, 58-year-old, but think of your frame right now and add 40 pounds. Add 24 pounds in the next 40 years. That's of just basically doing the status quo, doing pretty much the same exact thing that you're doing now. And remember, it's a lot about maintaining your weight and not trying to go too high or too low. But just staying where you are, not exactly going to help you in the next 40 years. Another 24 pounds to your frame is quite a bit. All right, so if this is a sensitive topic and there are little ears around, please pause it right here and take a listen when it's appropriate. I do want to talk about sexual motivation, because in any, when we talk about motivation, we know that there's many different types of motivation. When we talk about our sexual orientation, we're talking about an attraction to either your own sex or the opposite sex. I think in today's society, at least in America, we're much better about talking about sexual orientation, but still probably not where those who identify as, say, homosexual really see the openness and the diversity. Really only about 3 to 4% of the general population identifies as homosexual, which is not actually that much. Pansexual, bisexual, those are areas and demographics that are growing, but really it's not that big of a population. However, it's part of the population that very much needs to be understood. It's more accepted today than it used to be before. It used to be considered a mental illness. So the numbers might be inaccurate. I've heard some people say it's 10%. That's probably pretty high. Maybe upwards of 6 to 8% could be more typical. But people don't necessarily we might not necessarily have an accurate estimation of homosexuality, for instance, in America, not because people don't want to be homosexual, but because there is still a stigma attached to being homosexual. We know that the rates of the demographics, that there are fewer men than women fewer women than men who are homosexual. I think this is very true in my own life. Of the homosexuals I know, I think men probably outnumber the women probably 5 to 1, maybe even more like 8 to 1. I know many more homosexual men than I do homosexual women. Again, there are higher rates of depression and suicide in those who are homosexual, but it's not because they don't want to be gay. It's because they're afraid of social backlash, maybe from their families, maybe from their friends. Maybe they are in an environment where it's really not accepted and open. And so unfortunately, sexual motivation is sometimes really, what's the word? Prejudiced against. Keep in mind that sexual motivation is really a very natural part of human bodies and human motivation, human experience and feeling. And so being sexual is not a bad thing. Being either homosexual or heterosexual is a feeling that is very personal to each and every individual. When we talk about homosexuality, we do need to look at the nature-nurture issue. This is very interesting. You know, where we get most of our studies are in twin studies, right? When we look at the nature-nurture issue and that debate that constantly goes on, and we look at demographics in homosexual populations, we get a lot of interesting understanding out of twin studies. We realize that monozygotic twins have higher rates of homosexuality than dizygotic twins. Remember, dizygotic twins are essentially like brother and sister, right? Or sister and sister that don't share the same exact DNA. Monozygotic twins means they come from that one egg that then later separated. And so we realize that there is a very strong genetic link. Obviously, if you are a twin, correlation does not mean causation, but the study and the research that we have means there are higher rates and prevalence of homosexuality in twins. We have also looked at, I'm in the research section of this, but science has also looked at the fraternal birth order. And there's really significant studies that show when you are one of several boys in a family, males with older brothers have much higher rates of homosexuality. Now, of course, correlation does not mean causation. If you have 4 older brothers, it does not mean that you are going to be homosexual, but we do see there's a strong link between higher rates of homosexuality in fraternal birth order. So if you were one of the younger, it's a very common phenomenon. We don't really know why. That's why I have those question marks there. Could be something to do, this is the best guess that we have right now, has something to do with the mother's immune system, has a defensive response to substances produced by male fetuses. Each succeeding male, those antibodies become stronger and prevent the brain from developing in a male pattern. I think finally society is coming to understand that homosexuality is something that you are born with, and you carry out those characteristics in your lifestyle. It's not something like, I don't think people wake up and like, hey, I'm gonna try out homosexuality today. I'm gonna be gay. This is something that has probably been a part of their psyche and their personality for a very long time. All right, so actually, we're going to stop right there. There will be a quiz on Monday. Be prepared for it. These few slides on eating disorders and homosexuality, sexual motivation will not be on the quiz, but be ready for one on Monday. Talk to you later. Bye.